So before I start anything, I just want to give an overview of what we are doing today. Just a friendly reminder to everyone, like to keep your microphones on mute so that it doesn't add any noise to the audio. So the overview of what we're going to do today is I'll just the first thing is like maybe we'll spend the first 5 to 10 minutes just seeing what we're going to build. So that's going to be this game which I've already shared with you, and you can, if anyone has not tried it out, you can just try it out in the first 5 minutes. After we do that, like about around 9:15 we'll start, and I was thinking that we'll break up. So if you have to learn HTML, CSS and JavaScript in 2 hours, I was thinking, how do you do it? These are like 3 really huge concepts individually, and especially JavaScript, the programming language and all is quite vast. So what I felt is that let's give equal time to each of them. So about half an hour to each of them. And I don't want to, like, obviously as a workshop, I wanted you all to be coding most of it, and the lecture should be very less. But in this virtual format, I don't think it will work very well where I lecture and I pause every minute for you all to kind of write the code. I think we would lose a lot of time. So what I'll do is in each half an hour slot for HTML, for CSS, I'll do a short, I'll do an initial lecture, which will probably take about half the slot, so 15 minutes. And then I'll give you 15 minutes to just code on your own. I would also encourage you to, code along as much as you can. If you find the content to be too basic, like say you already know the content, so because there's going to be a guide and I'm going to share that guide with you. So if you can follow the steps of the guide on your own, go ahead and start coding. That's totally fine. Even when I teach. But if you're not familiar or if you're not sure with things, then it's okay to just wait and just listen to what I have to say and then start coding. Right? So I encourage most of you all to listen to the lecture, but if you all feel like coding and on the side, then feel free to do that. Right? So with that out of the way, then apart from just these 3 steps, then the last step, we'll spend about 15 minutes with doing deployment. So I'll show you how you can actually deploy your website, and then we'll conclude, right? So that I'm planning to cover all of this in 2 hours. So let's quickly start. So you all can see my screen, right?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so let me first. So has everyone created a GitHub account?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So has everyone tried the game that we had to that we're planning to build today? Right. So if you have not tried the game, I'll just share it with you. If anyone has not tried it, so it's good to just get a little familiar with what we're gonna. Yeah. So I just shared a link. You can just click on that and just play it for a couple of minutes. Don't play it for too long. And but I mean, do get familiar with it. So that's important. Okay, so while you all are trying the game, so I'll just also share one more link with you, and that is the workshop link. So I just shared a GitHub link with all of you all. I want you all to click that. Okay, and this GitHub repository contains the entire workshop that we're going to do. It's basically a guide, like think of it like your PowerPoint slides, my presentation, whatever it is, but it's more than that. It actually is a self-paced guide that you can even do on your own. But today I'm going to guide you on doing this guide as well. Right? So you don't need to like read through it completely right now, but you can just follow my screen and as I present. So let me just show you. So if you see at the start of the guide, so quick background about GitHub before I start. So Git and GitHub, you all must have heard of this terminology. So it's nothing but a place to store source code, right? And source code is basically finally what developers write. So we need to write programs in source code in some programming language or some language, and we need to store it somewhere. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's important. And once you store source code, then from that maybe you may need to build it and deploy it somewhere. So those are some additional steps, and GitHub gives you additional features to help you with building, deploying, and a lot of things like managing source code, collaboration between team members, and all those things. So why Git and GitHub? Like, why can't I just store source code on my local file system or maybe on a Google Drive? Right. So let me see if I can quickly find a Git branch visualization. So you'll just understand. Yeah, so we can just look at this as an example. Let me see if I can give it up. Yeah, so if you can basically with source code, right, what happens is that when you start, like see this diagram, okay, you can see that it's like something like a tree. Like you start at some point, and then that point it branches off into 2 points here, and the red and the green, and then there is one track that keeps going forward. Then again there is another branch. So what happens with source code also is that uh, when you're alone, you could be working on just one version of your source code. Like what I mean by version is you can just keep making changes and keep updating your source code and going forward, and that's totally fine, right? Like especially when you're just starting out, you probably don't even need to know what was the history. Like you'll be wondering what is the need for that. But the moment you use a tool like this, you'll find it really powerful, because first thing is that even as a solo developer, as an individual developer, if you're just going forward and making changes, so every change in GitHub or Git is tracked in GitHub, or is tracked by GitHub. So at any point of time, if I want to go into the past, I can see it, and you can just see it here also for this repository. If I just click on this 36 commits, you can see all the commits I made in this repository. So this basically right now you can see it's just a README file. So all of them are just update README, update README. But each and every one of this, if I click, I can see what specifically I changed, right? And this red says I deleted this, and this green said I added this. So it's showing me my history. So why is this great? It's because if something goes wrong in the future, I'll have a way of seeing at what point did it broke, right? And I can see what state it was before that, and I can make changes. So that's one. So even if you're working just by yourself, Git is really useful, or any version. These are called software versioning control systems, right? So any version control systems. There are other ones other than Git. In the past, we used to have CVS, SVN. In commercial space, there's something called Perforce, but Git by far is the most popular thing right now. So first, if you're just working individually, you get this view where you can go back and all that, and that's really nice. Second thing is, even if you're working individually, you may not always be working on the same, you may be having different lines of thought or different features that you're trying to implement. And it's a good, healthy practice to basically branch it out and start building that in a separate version of the repository. So think of that as, I have one version of my repository called main. So you can see here, main. And this version of the repository has just a single file called README, and that README has this content. If I click on main, and if I change to one of these other branches, you'll see that it has two files here, README and index, and the README is actually different. So what I've done today is I've actually broken the workshop into different parts, and each part is a separate branch. These are called branches. Is a separate branch in Git. But in the same way, when you're a developer and you're coding, when you are working on different features, right, it's a good practice to just make a separate branch for that feature, code it independently on that branch, and then later at some point when you want to merge it into the main branch, right, in a real coding scenario, you merge code into like a master branch or a main branch, which actually gets deployed into a production system. So then at that point, the Git actually gives you workflows to do merges and things like that. So just wanted you all to understand the concept of Git, that Git is nothing but just a way to track fundamentally it's that, just a way to track your source code so that you can do these things. You can have like a single branch and have different versions of that branch. You can have multiple branches with different versions for each branch. And you can do things like, you can see these lines which connect. Here, this green connects back to this blue. These are called merges. This is when you started a separate branch and then you merge that branch back into the main branch. So that means that whatever changes you made in this branch, you're bringing it back into the master branch. So that's why you're just seeing a diagram like this. Don't think too much beyond that. Like just know that it's just a way to manage your source code with different versions, and it's great individually itself. It's even, I mean, it's a necessity when you're working in a team, because when you're in a team, you can't, like, if all of you all are just submitting to a single branch, it's going to be extremely confusing as to who's making what change. Things will be very chaotic. So it's better that everyone works in their own individual branches, and then at some point you merge that. Like each person tries to merge it, and then you go through a review workflow or something like that, typically, to see whether that merge makes sense, right? So just know that is why we use Git. Okay, so let me so like I said, now to start this workshop, there is a guide over here, and if you read this guide, it says that you need to has something called Gitpod setup, right? So you can actually start doing this while I just log into my Gitpod as well. Just follow the steps in the guide. And what I request is, I mean, at this point of time, if you have questions, you can just share it in the chat and I'll take a look and answer that. Just follow the guide. But basically, it's just telling you to create an account called Gitpod. And why we're using Gitpod is because you basically, whenever you're coding, you need a coding environment, right? You need a place where you can you can go and edit your source code. That is one. So you need a code editor, but that code editor you can do actually in Git itself. Like if you just press edit, you can just go and edit the files. So, but why do you need a development environment is because it's more than just an editor. It gives you a place to build your source code, run it, things like that. And I felt like it's good to learn one code editor that's like a really good code editor. And Gitpod is really nice because it's basically a code editor in the browser. You don't need to install anything. You just need to launch Gitpod and just follow the steps that I mentioned. There is one critical permission step you need to do. Just do that. And then if you go to Gitpod and you say new workspace, and in this, if you search for your project, search for this project. So yeah, wait, before we start this, I'll just tell you what we need to do. So when you're starting this workshop, you need to first start with a fork. Okay, so make a copy of this because you can't. You need to work on your own version of this code base, and to do that, you need to fork it first. So click on fork, right? And I have a couple of other Gitpod accounts, so I'll just put it in a different. Instead, what I'll do is let me just sign into a different GitHub account and show you how it works. Just give me a second. So what I'll do is since the code is in my GitHub Renzel account, I'll just switch to another account that I have. And it'll be similar to what you all will be doing. Like you all will have your own accounts and how do you all start this, right? So let's go here. Yeah. Let's see, let me just put this. Okay, so now here, what you'll need to do is navigate to that repository. So again, I recommend that you'll just follow along, just watch what I'm doing, and then I'll give you time to actually do this on your own as well. Right? So that repository is web dev workshop, and start by clicking on this button fork. Okay, and it asks you where you should fork it. So I'll just fork it into my own account. So I have multiple accounts. You may not see that pop up because you may not have multiple accounts. So once you fork it, the next step is to get, log into Gitpod with, and you can log into Gitpod with your GitHub username itself. So I'll just sign out of this one and just log in with the new GitHub account that I've connected. I'll just delete any workspaces that I already have. Okay, and just make sure that in settings, in integrations, so this step is mentioned there. Just make sure that if you come to Git providers, GitHub, and you click these three dots, edit permissions, you see here I have a lot of things checked. You don't need all of these. Just make sure the first and the third one, user email and public repo, are checked. Right? Just make sure these two are checked before you proceed. So then from workspaces, you say new workspace. All right, and then what you can do is search for this workspace called workshop, and it will show up here, and click on that. And just by doing that, now Gitpod will get to work and it will start creating an online development environment for you based on this repository from GitHub, right? And you absolutely have to do nothing. I'll show you what I mean. Let me just change the color theme to look like how it might look for you all. Okay, so this, if you all are familiar with Visual Studio Code, it's the same because Gitpod under the hood uses Visual Studio Code. So that's an open source platform, and Gitpod actually uses the same thing, right? So that's why it's looking just like Visual Studio Code. And yeah, so at this point we have a development environment. You can see the same view of our, just a second. The same view of our repository is over here. So main has one README file. So you see the same README file here, and you can see that main is mentioned down here below. So this is the branch. So if I click on this, a pop-up opens, and you can actually change the branches here and go to other branches, right? So this is just the basics of GitHub and Gitpod. So at this point of time, let me start the first workshop. So if you read the guide, what it says is that you need to switch to the branch called workshop/part1 HTML to start, right? So let me just switch to that, and I'll quickly explain what we're going to do. Okay, so here, if you see in this branch, there are two files. There's a README and there's an index.html that I've already created for you to start. Right? So a quick background about HTML. So HTML is basically the language of the web, right? And what I mean by that is anything that you see in your browser, whenever you go to any website, GitHub, Gitpod, Google, you name it, Facebook. Finally, what happens is your browser is just asking a web server somewhere. It can be anywhere in the world. It's saying, give me the web page, give me an HTML page for this website. All right. And HTML page means basically when the browser gets an HTML page, that's telling the browser how this website should look. So one part about HTML is what the look should be, what should be the content that goes into it. But then beyond that, HTML has something called CSS, which is embedded inside it. So either directly inside the HTML file, you would put styles, and styles deals with, how specifically it should look, like what are the colors, what are the fonts, what is the layout, like, should it be centered, should it be to the left, should it be to the right? So that is CSS. And then the behavior, which is JavaScript. So, but you need to understand that everything comes through HTML. Like your browser doesn't start by loading a JavaScript file or start by loading a CSS. It starts by loading a root HTML, basically an HTML page for the particular page that or the website that you're visiting. And from that page, the browser fetches all these other resources like CSS, JavaScript, and so on. Now, what is HTML, right? So HTML is nothing but it's a markup language. So a quick history about about markup languages itself. So I read somewhere that like maybe about 40-50 years ago, there were these, there was a requirement in the industry where people, maybe, these business people, they would create these long documents or whatever, presentations or publications. So there would be, if you know about publications, it's a lot of text. And in that text, it's not like you write your first draft and you just publish it. Like you want to keep iterating it and improving it and making it look better. And making it look better is an important part of that process. So what they used to do was they used to take a highlighter and they used to literally highlight parts of the text and say that, this part needs to go bold, this part needs to go italic. And the presenter would just do that and hand it over to somebody else who was an expert who could get that done. So I think they would be called typesetters or something. So that's called markup. Like literally you just take any body of text and you just like say this README file, you just take a body of text and with a physical pen, like these were printed papers, with a physical pen, you highlight this. And the way you highlight, like say you use a red pen, it means you want to make it bold. You use a yellow pen, you want to make it italic. So there was a certain standard that they would follow, and that's how work used to be done. Now in the digital age, when computers and internet happened in the 90s and all, so they took the same paradigm to basically display websites on the internet, right? So what you do in HTML is you basically mark up text, or you mark up information in the same way. Okay, so for example, so if you see here, HTML is made up of tags. Okay, so these are called tags: HTML head, body, etc. These are all tags, and the way it works is that you put tags inside other tags. So it's like, imagine like with a red highlighter you mark first, and inside that there was one word which you wanted to make italic. So you put a yellow highlighter on top of that yellow one, but that's inside the red. So this is like, imagine the HTML here, outer one is like a red highlighter, the inner body is like a yellow highlighter, something like that. So it's just like highlighting what you want to do to the stuff inside it. Okay, so that's what this means, and it has a particular syntax. You can just see it and kind of learn it. Like there are these angular brackets and then a tag name, and most tags have a starting and an ending tag, right? So the same, because like it's telling where you start the highlighting pen and where you end it. So most tags are like that. Some tags don't. Some tags like meta, for example, and you'll see some others, they just have a single tag. These are called empty tags or empty elements. They don't have anything inside them. All right, and the reason for that is they don't need to, because they're not highlighting anything. They're just giving, in the case of Meta, it's just giving some information to your browser, right? So you don't need to really worry about this meta tag and this link, for example, right now. Just know that HTML documents are made of these tags, and they're composed, right? One tag goes in another. So every time you use a tag, you basically create an HTML, something what we call an HTML element. So here there is one element called HTML, there is one element called head, there's one element called body, and so on, right? And the head goes inside the HTML tag, and similarly body is also inside the HTML tag, right? These two are like siblings or adjacent to each other, head and body. They're both like children of the same parent tag. All right, and a basic HTML document has this structure. If you just remove this meta and link, right? If I just, let me just delete that. A very basic HTML body document has this structure. So you just mention a doc type on top, which is also optional. You can skip that. So that just tells browsers that this document is an HTML document. And you can, a lot of HTML is optional. You can actually skip it simply because browsers are very lenient. Like they'll forgive you if you make mistakes in general, like when it comes to HTML. So, but this is the actual format. Like when you're creating an HTML document, you specify the doc type, you specify an HTML document, and inside that you have head and body tags, right? So I've just added these extra two things because the first one is needed for displaying your website properly on a mobile phone, right? You can read the comment on that and learn more about that later on your own. The second one is a way to get icons into your documents. I just, in this, because it's a workshop and to save you time, I've already done that for you, so you don't have to go to the step and do it, right? Okay, so let me just tell you what are we going to do as in this first phase of the workshop. So let me just open this quickly. Okay, so this is the landing page, and what I want to do is quite simply, I want to do the HTML of this landing page. Okay, so so the HTML of this landing page means HTML is, if you don't look at styles, the CSS, and if you don't look at JavaScript, that means that I'm not concerned with the colors, I'm not concerned with the fonts. Okay, I'm only concerned with the content, right? Like I want to have Hollywood quiz appearing on my website. I want to have this play button and this play text. Okay, what we're not going to do, it's there in the guide I mentioned, is we're not going to do this difficulty slider, and we're not going to do this audio button. All right, we're just going to do this title, this play button, and this play text. All right, so before we start doing this, in the guide also I mentioned what you need when you're doing web development is you need to have a way to test your website to see how your website looks when it runs. So in the guide, I've given this step as well. You just need to create a new terminal. Let me just create a new terminal. And in that terminal, you just need to run this command, npx browser sync -w. And this is the power of Gitpod. Like basically, if you were to install this npx and all on your local machine, you would waste a lot of time. So with Gitpod, it's already there. You can just start working on your tools immediately. So the moment you run this, you'll see that after it's done running, it may open a browser window for you as well. It may show some pop-ups. Just close all that. Just click on this Remote Explorer button, and when you come there, there is a globe button. Just click on that, and this shows you a blank page. Okay, right now it's a blank page. Now the cool thing is, if I just type something here, hello world, in the body, inside the body, it appears here. So this page that you're seeing here is basically a live visualization of this HTML page, right? And that's what this npx browser sync does. It basically just creates it basically runs a server that it's actually running a web server locally on this Gitpod machine, and that is actually serving this web page when you go to this same HTML page when you go to this website. So you don't need to worry about all that. Just follow the steps. Like just run the npx browser sync, click on Remote Explorer, click on that, and you will get this, right? So once this is running, now we want to display Hollywood quiz, play button, and this play text, right? So how do we do that? So HTML has tags, like I told you, for everything. So typically for a heading, right? We have heading tags, and these range from H1 to H6. So I'm going to use the largest one. The largest size is H1, and I'm going to use the largest one for the Hollywood quiz. So let me just put that. 1 second before. Yeah, can someone confirm if you all can hear me?
Yeah, sir.
Yeah. So before you even put tags, this is what you should do. Okay, don't even put tags. Just write what is the content you want. Okay, so say I want to put Hollywood quiz. I want to put a play button. This is giving some autocomplete, so I'll just remove that. Play button, and I want to put play text. Okay, this play. These are the three things. So I just save that and look at it. So these are the three things I want. I want Hollywood quiz. I want a play button, which is actually an icon, and I want this play to come. Okay. So this is actually how people, if you imagine, would have done it in the past. They would have taken a document which was not structured. So this is a document that is not structured, and they would start structuring it. So let's start structuring this. I want this to be a heading. So I put this inside a H1. Okay. So I just put that inside a H1, and by doing that, see what happens there. Hollywood quiz suddenly looks different. It looks like it has a default style. So every browser comes with default styles for every element that you put. And you can, you should learn that on your own later. Like once you get very familiar with HTML and all that, you'll typically what you'll do is that you'll override all these styles. But you should just know that every browser comes with default styles, just so that even if you don't do any styling with CSS, it will try to make it look presentable, and it'll try to give it some meaningful look. So H1 here is appearing so big. Next, let me do this play button. So this I'll make it an H2 and put it here. Okay, so look at that. Hollywood quiz and play looks fine. It looks big. It doesn't look fine, but it's at least it's tagged correctly. It's tagged with the correct tags. This is a heading, our biggest heading, and this is the second biggest heading that we have. For this play button, to use buttons in general, I like to use a tool called Remix Icon. Let me just show you that. So there are different ways to do buttons. But if you see in this entire workshop, we are not going to deal with any assets, because that's going to waste a lot of time where you download a file, upload it to your Git and all. So one of the cool things you can do with websites is you can have a link to any asset, like be it a icon, an image, or even an audio file, a video file. You can just put the link and have it show up in your website. All right, and I'll show you how that works. Like, say for example, I want a play icon. And I want this, I think this play circle looks good. So I'll copy this. It's telling that, just copy this from Remix Icon. These are all free icons. And I just put it here, put this code here. Okay, so this uses a tag called I. I is actually meant for, I think, italics and things like that, but they and many of these icon libraries seem to be using it for their icons. So just by putting it there, you can see I'm getting a play button automatically. Like I don't have to do anything else. All right. So how did this work? This is where, this link, I'll just show you. So if you see Remix Icons documentation, so when you're doing this on your own, always read the docs whenever you're going to put icons or do anything from an external party. So when you read the docs, it will somewhere in this, it has told me that if you're using this as a CDN, so CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and this is what this is just another way to say what I said earlier. Like if I want to embed links and I don't want to embed the actual icon itself in my website, I don't want to put the file on my web server and all that. So I want the file to come from a Content Delivery Network. So CDN is nothing but a server that gives you the content, right? So then what I need to do is I need to copy this link and put it in the head tag, and that is what I had done here. That's just exactly what I've done here. This is how it's working. Like if this was not here, I'll just remove that. The browser will not be able to understand what this means, this class means, right? The only reason the browser is able to understand is because we have told the browser here to basically import some file from an external server. You can see it's cdn.js deliver.net. It's some external server. And because of that, the browser is able to understand this. All right. If you also read the docs here, you'll see somewhere below they mentioned sizing, and they've told how you can increase the size of your button. So you just need to add these sizing classes in addition to this. So I'm just going to add a sizing class here, 3x, and let's see how that looks. There you go. Okay, and that's it. That's it for the first part. I just want you all to do this. All right. So just get familiar with HTML, right? The idea about HTML is, remember, it's nothing to do with looks or layout. it is just with content, right? So we started with, you saw, I didn't have any tags, nothing. I just put the content inside body. So body is basically where whatever you see here in your web page goes. You have to put it inside body. So I just started by putting whatever I wanted in plain English, just put it there and then start marking it up, right? And marking it up is something that you need to keep practicing, like down the line beyond this workshop, by learning about new tags, and you will find some resources in the guide to do that. But for now, for this workshop, y'all can take, about 5 to 10 minutes, about 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, I would say, to just do these steps, right? Just on your own, just have this ready, right? So I'll just give you all this time right now. Okay, I'm just, in the meantime, I'll be answering questions, so y'all can carry on, and others can just try these steps. So kindly share the link for the guide if possible. So does everyone have the guide? I'll just share it again. Renzel, so forking is necessary only if we have multiple. No, forking is necessary. So the idea of forking is, so when Renzel created this workshop, I created some repository. Today it's a workshop, tomorrow it may be some other code. It may be the code for Facebook, right? And say you're a developer and you're also you're somebody who also wants to work on that, but independently. You don't want to work on, you don't have even permissions to work in my account, right? I don't, nobody can just submit code into my account. So that's why you do fork. Fork is nothing but take whatever that repository is in Renzel's account, because Renzel has decided to share it publicly. And that's what we mean by open source, right? Like we are opening it and sharing it for anybody. So just take that entire repository along with its history, commits, everything, whatever is there, just take it and bring it into my account, where I have the permissions to make changes to it. And whatever changes I make will be recorded under my username. Like it will not go into Renzel's repository. So Renzel can continue to do his workshop and not worry about me, spoiling this thing, what do you say, that document or whatever. Like I can just make changes independently. So forking is nothing but just copying it, but just keep in mind it copies with the entire history and everything. So it's very good for you to also see. You can also go back and view the history. You can go make your changes in your forked thing, because that is in your own account. And then in real industry use cases or even open source use cases, at some point when you feel like I want to contribute to the original repository, there is a workflow called a pull request in GitHub, where you can create a pull request from your changes to my repository, from your repository to mine, and I will have to review it and approve it if I like it. Right? Like I'm the maintainer, and not if I like it, but if it's something that I want in my repository, then I or any maintainer will, for that repository, will approve it. So that's typically the source code workflow everyone follows. Yeah. So next question: how to switch to the part 1 branch from Gitpod? Okay, sorry. Let me just show that. So in Gitpod, at the bottom left, you have this button, which is basically your branches, and when you so if you just click, then it will allow you to change. But because I made some changes here, it's telling me not to change. Like it's giving me a warning. So let me just revert these changes. Okay, so let me just show you that again. I'll just change to main branch. So now I've shifted to the main branch. So this doesn't have that index.html. So if I click on main and click on origin workshop part 1 HTML, this switches to part 1 HTML branch. Right? And you're supposed to make the changes in this HTML file. So could you please explain how you switch from main branch to workshop HTML? You show how to create a new file called game.html, repeat the npx command. Okay, so the npx command is this one. I'll just show you that. Npx browser sync -w. So all of these steps are in the guide. So if you can just try looking in the guide. I mentioned this step as well there, but this is the command, right? How to create game.html, just right click inside. So this in GitHub, in Gitpod, this is Visual Studio Code. These are your main tabs, like your main different tabs. So you have this is just a directory, a browser of your source code. Second one is search, and the third one is actually viewing your changes and things like that, and we'll see that later. So in the first one, just right click and say new file, and then you can say game.html. Right? So this game.html step is actually oh yeah, this step is also something that I wanted you all to do. So what you all can do here is copy this, paste this. So I don't see any other questions right now. Yeah, so one step I just forgot to mention to you all is after putting your headings. So let me just quickly do that. Hollywood quiz and this icon button. The icon and H2. This is play. And in this, I'll just make it R1 3x large. Okay. And yeah, so I have a game.html file that now I've created. And what I did is I just copy pasted the same document as index in that. And you can just delete the body. And if you see the steps that I mentioned there, I've told that just create a home button in game.html. So let me just put a home button here. So this is the one that I actually used in my game home 2 line. So I just copy that, put that in my game.html. Right? And what I've asked you all to also do, I think, let me just see, is that, yeah, so I've asked you to do it in the workshop steps itself, is how do you create links, right? And that's such an important part in web development. So for that, use a tag called an anchor tag, A tags, okay? And just like how you were wrapping content before, so an anchor tag, you wrap whatever you want to be clickable as a link. So in the index page, I want my play button to be clickable. So I wrap that inside an anchor tag and I put this href. You use an attribute. These are called attributes. So I use an attribute called href and I say go to game.html when someone clicks on this. So let me just open this in a browser. And you see now this play button, it's already being styled with some different color because this is how browsers by default style links. They make them look blue. And if I click that play button, it goes to this game.html with a home button shown there. Right? So the same thing for the home button I've told you all to do as well. So just wrap this in an anchor link and make it redirect to index.html. So now if you see this home button is also linked, comes here, play button is a link, goes here. Okay, so in the interest of time, we need to move to CSS. So I'll just see if there are any other questions. No other questions. So let's start and let's move to CSS. Before we move to CSS, just one last thing I want you all to do. Click on this third button in your source control. And in that, you'll find that you'll see your changes, whatever you've done. So you can see index.html. It's showing that, there's some, it will show you this view where it shows you the old version of the file and the new version of the file on the right. And green means, like I said earlier, you have added these lines there. And if you see game.html, the entire thing is green. You basically added the entire file. So what I want you all to do is to submit this into your own branch, right? And I actually missed telling you all that step at the start as well, is before you start making changes, even at this point, before you push any changes into this repository, just create your own branch. And for that, just click again on the branch name and you see the first option. Don't take the second one. Just say create new branch, click that and use a naming convention, like use your username. So in this GitHub account, my username is Rapoya. You can use anything, but just a good convention is to use your GitHub username and whatever is the branch that you're working on. So in this case, I'll just call it part 1 HTML. So you can name it anything, but now you see here on my screen, its branch has changed to Rapo AI part 1 HTML. So if you recollect right at the start, I had shown you that visualization where there was those, those Git, in Git, you could see those dots branching into different lines and stuff. So that's what I've just done here. I've created a new line, a new branch. And now in this view, if you come to this view, if I just select both of these files and I click this plus button. So now in Git, this is the way you make changes. From any change that you have done, which is, just a change, you first stage it. You put it in a staging area. So staging area is just a place for you to see, what am I planning to submit into Git, right? So you can just see here. You can also, like, it's very nice because you can have changes which you're not staging and changes which you're staging. So you can decide what you want to stage. So right now I want to stage both of these files. So just put a commit message. So just say, in this case, I'll just say completed part 1 of the workshop. You can put any meaningful short message here. And then there is this checkbox here, which says commit. So I'm going to check that and then it commits, right? If after you've done this, if you want to push your changes to, now this is all happening in Gitpod locally. This has not been pushed to GitHub. the repository, the server that stores your source code, right? This is just right now being pushed in your local version of Git. So Git works like that. Git has a server Git and a local Git. So whenever you make changes and you make commits, you're actually making changes in your local version. So to push it to your server, you have to click this menu and say push inside that, right? So it may give you this. It has no remote branch. Would you like to publish? I say okay. And then once that's done, if you come here and if you just refresh this, oops, let's go back here. If you just click on the branches, you should see a branch named Rapo. Okay, I don't see it. Right? Am I in the right account? Rapo. Okay, pick a remote to publish. For some reason, I have two remotes in this. So just whenever, if you get these choices of remotes, always pick your origin remote, okay? Because your origin remote is your own account and upstream is actually my account. So I'll just pick the origin and push it. And now you can see here, you'll see that the branch is actually appearing in GitHub. Okay? So I'll move ahead to CSS while y'all can, just start. Y'all can just try this push step as well. It's basically this is the basics of GitHub. If you can do this, then you can basically do most of the things that developers do on Git. Right? Because what we just do is that we just open a branch, we check out a branch, and then we make some changes, or we start with the branch, we make our own copy from that branch, make some changes on that, push it, and then sometime in the future we merge. So that merge step I'm not going to talk about today, but that's something that you can explore on your own if you want to. Like, how do you merge from some branch into another branch? Right? So, but this is really the basics, fundamentals of Git. So let's move on to CSS. So I'll go to part 2 over here. So I think we select origin workshop part 2 initially. There we go. Okay. And just close all these other open files. Right, and I'll switch it over here as well, because if you want to read the document, then it's easier to read it. It gets formatted nicely on GitHub, whereas if you want to just code, then you switch to Gitpod. Right? Okay, so CSS. What is CSS? Now let's just refresh this page. Okay, so I've actually now, if you switch to this workshop, and if your npx browser sync is still running, and if you refresh it, you'll see that the first page is exactly like how we had done in the workshop, but you'll see in the second page I've actually put all the HTML elements. Okay, so this is just so that you all basically at every part of the workshop, I'm just completing the previous part fully, like making it like, if I were building this game today, how would I complete the entire HTML? So I would actually put all of the HTML elements, and that's what I've actually done here. I put all the HTML elements that we're going to see in our game. So if you see our game here, if I play it, you can see that it has this home button. So I'm not doing audio, but it has home, it has this level heading and 3 hearts. So I put the same thing here, home, level heading and 3 hearts. And then it has a question, and I just put a placeholder for the question. It has an image, and it has those 4 answer options. So if you see the starting point here, I've just put these, the raw HTML here. I've not done any styling. These are all default styles coming from the browser. Okay, so styles, what is CSS? So as you might already be guessing, like this doesn't look very, very presentable. So CSS is about presenting it well, right? And what is the most important thing while presenting, or what are the really, really important things that really stand out? So one is, first and foremost, I would say, is definitely layout. Like you want the layout to look like how you, how your game should be, or how your target should be. So you want this Hollywood quiz to come in the center here. You want this play button and play text also to come in the center, and then you want a lot of space between the two. And then similarly in this also, there is a lot of layout stuff that needs to be done. So how do we start doing this, right? And apart from layout, we also want to adjust the colors. Like we want to make Hollywood quiz and play have these orangey colors, and there are even some effects. If you notice, like there is a small white shadow effect there and stuff like that. If you hover over this play button, there's a play, there's a little hover state, like you can see a different color. And then in the background, you can see there's a background image that is animated. So all of this, like, how do we do this, right? So that's the goal of this stage of the workshop. Again, like before, what I recommend is that you just let me, explain what I explain for some time. I'll give you all, and then in the end, I'll give you all about 10 to 15 minutes to try this on your own, right? So it's okay if you all don't, if you all are not able to complete the entire workshop in those 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, ideally, I would like you all to do it, but because in the interest of time and we need to carry on to learn JavaScript as well, and the next steps, so we'll have to cut it. But you can always try it out later, and I'm always reachable in case you have any doubts. All right, so let's get started. So if I were to style this, there are different ways to just different places where you can place your CSS style. But the simplest way is you create a tag called style, right? And this tag can be anywhere. It can be in your head, it can be in your body, but a good rule or a good practice is to just put it in your head towards the end, right? This is what we call like a style that is embedded in the HTML file itself. Okay, there is a way to put the style outside of the HTML file, which we'll not do as part of this phase of the workshop. All right, so now we want to start adding styles here. So what is a CSS style, and how do you put it, right? So CSS works based on some concept called CSS rules. Okay, and the general format of a CSS rule is you use something called a CSS selector. So I'm just writing in English here, selector. Then you use these brackets. These are your braces. And inside your braces, you write your rules. Okay, you write a rule one. And the way the rule works also is it's basically a property and a value. And you terminate it with a semicolon. Okay, and you can have property one, value one, property two, whatever value for that property, etc., etc. So let me give you an example. So say I want this this heading to come in the center. All right. So I can try something like H1. H1 is a selector which is saying select all H1 elements in my document. All right. So I want for all H1 documents, I want to set a property called text align, and I want to say center. All right. And just by doing that, this has come towards the center. All right. So now I've brought H1 here. Now, what if I also want to bring H2 there? There are different ways to do it. One simple, you can have a separate rule for H2 and do it, or this selector can take multiple values that are comma separated. So each of these means that I want H1, and also H2. Basically, this is you're basically just saying this and this and this. Okay, so now I say H2 as well, get it to the center. And same thing, we can also maybe do it for maybe this anchor tag. Let's just try if this works. Some of this you need to play around with. So look, this is not working. Okay, so these two have come to the center. So another aspect about CSS also. So if you expand CSS, it stands for cascading style sheets. So cascading means nothing but something from the outer element. If you set it on the outer element, a property, many of these properties cascade to inner elements. And let me show you what is an example of that. So if I take body as the outer element and I say body text align center, you'll see all of them have come to the center. And why this happened is because this property text align cascades. It actually, from the outer element, it goes down to any element that wants to inherit from its ancestor, from its parent, one of its parents. So, and that's what's happened here, right? So that's why it has centered, just by setting this, it has centered it for all of them. And this is good. Like this actually, basically another thing to note also is that if you have just seen, there are multiple ways to achieve the same thing, to bring this as center. So there's no right or wrong, okay, at this stage, at least when you're working independently. So the goal of this workshop is I want all of you all to just explore and have fun. And when you're exploring and having fun, there is really no, like, don't be too concerned about, what somebody else says about what is the right way to do something and all. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if you're able to get it centered, that's all that matters. So just get it centered, whether it's right or wrong. There is a lot of, if you go online and you start talking to people, one person will have a different opinion. So there's no point, I would say, wasting time on that at this stage, right? That only makes sense maybe when you're working in some team kind of a project or an open source project where you need to have some sort of a standard where, so everyone writes the code in the same way, then okay, maybe it makes sense. But if you're working on your own, just get it done. It doesn't really have any real impact to what you're trying to do. So with that said, Okay, so we got the text to come in the center. What else do we want to do? We want to change the colors of this heading and the button. So one really nice thing is, suppose this game is there and you want to see what is this color and you want to understand it, you can right click on it and say inspect. Okay, so in most browsers, and if you're using Chrome, it will be almost the same as the one that my browser right now. But in most browsers, you will have this inspect view where you will get these different things, and one of the views will actually show you all the CSS properties, okay, for that particular element. Like if I highlight this H1 element, it's showing me all the properties for that. So you can literally copy someone else's code if you want to build the same thing, the same effect. But I don't want you all to do that. I mean, exactly this copy paste, but just read when you're trying to achieve something, just see how it was achieved and then paste it, right? So in this case, I just want to take the color from here. So I'll just see what is the color value. It is this. So I'm just going to take that and paste it in. So I'm going to say, again, I can say H1, H2's color is so-and-so. That's one way to say it, and it'll update. Or another way is using Cascade. I can just put it on the body, and then by default, that makes all elements have this color. Okay, notice the play button hasn't changed color, and that's happening because I've already clicked on the play button. And if you remember from websites, whenever you click on a link, if you've clicked it once, then it styles it differently. So browsers have a default different style for it. All right. So with that done, colors are set. So yeah, next let me show you how you can change the font. Okay, font. So for fonts, I like to use something called Google Fonts. Right? There will be others as well, but Google Fonts is by far the most popular one. And I'll just quickly show you the one that I picked for this. So I think when you do this workshop, you can see I've already done this step, like going to Google Fonts and embedding a font in the head, right? But I'll just show you what I did. So I went to Google Fonts. I just added some filter, and then I just typed the string that I wanted to render, and then I just looked at which looks good, right? And I found this Titan one to look good, so I clicked on that. So this is the way you would do it yourself in the future if you have to do it. And when you click on this, then at the if you just scroll down, select this style. If you just say at some point, why am I not seeing? Okay, that's strange. Just a second. Let me take a different. I do not know why it is not showing me the embed link. Okay, but basically, usually Google Fonts, when I select a style, it would show me a little pop-up on the side that shows me how to, if I just say view selected families, there you go. So let me just remove this. So if I just selected Titan 1, you will see that to use it on the web, to embed a font, copy this code into the head of your HTML. So it tells you what you need to do. So I've just done that for you all already. So you don't need to do this step, but just wanted to show you that. So once you copy this step, Google Fonts also mentions how to use it. So add this CSS rule if you want to get this font. So I'm just going to add this CSS rule. And this one, I'll specifically add it only for H1 and H2. I'll not add it for the entire body, because I don't want any text to just come with this Titan 1 font. And just by doing that, check that out. It's become much more, it's starting to look a lot more like our actual font here. Okay, one more thing I'll quickly set is the font size. So this really nice thing happens is you get autocomplete suggestions for properties, and I'll just set it on the body to 24px. This is just out of memory. I just remember you have to, when you do it for your own websites, you play around and try it out. Okay, what else do we need to do? Let's change the button style. Okay, so let's change the button style. How do we do that? So this is a button, okay, and currently you can see it has an underline underneath it. So if you want to remove that underline, so first I need to target this button, right? So if you see, the underline actually comes because of the anchor tag. Anchor being a link, the browsers by default puts an underline under every anything that is embedded inside an anchor tag. So if you want to remove that, there is a property called text decoration, and you just set that to none. So I'm rushing through a little over here, okay, because in the interest of time, but but you'll, I think I have gotten the gist of what I'm doing. Basically, I'm doing this from memory. I just know these tags and I know the properties. But when you do this, you'll have to, maybe dig up the properties. I don't know if I've shared them. Yeah, I've shared the properties here. But when you do this, you will have to, if you're doing it on a real website, you'll have to maybe research the properties and learn them. And I've shared some links to how to do that. Okay. We're running a little late, so I'll just do the two most important things that I wanted to cover. Right. So I'll just show you Flex. Probably I'll just show you Flex. I may not show you animations today. Right? So now if you want to, this is a very important one. Layout, because layout is fundamental. Like if you can get your layouts to look good, then all of a sudden your websites will like really be aesthetically pleasant. So I'll just make that button look bigger, which was missing. Okay, so if you want this layout to, if you want to make layout changes, again, millions of different ways to do it in CSS. But what I would recommend in general, whenever possible, is use something called Flex. Okay, and I'll show you what is Flex. So let me just, what I'll do is I'll just put all of these things which we already have inside a container called div. So div is nothing but a container. Okay, it doesn't do anything other than just creates a container for these elements. Right? So it's an empty, it's like, it doesn't have anything that it draws to the screen. It just contains things. But because it is an element, you can put styles on it. And the way I'm going to target this div is I'm going to give it an ID. Okay, an ID is an attribute that you can give to any element. But the catch is that there can be only one unique ID for an element. So I cannot use container now anywhere else, right? Whereas class, on the other hand, is a reusable attribute. And the idea of class is that, okay, if I have 4 buttons that look the same, then I want to give them all the same class. But if I want to target one exact button in those 4 buttons, then I would target it with an ID. So in general, IDs are good because you can just target that thing directly. So now if I just want to target this container, the syntax is you put, the CSS selector says you put hash followed by the ID name. If you want to target a class, you put dot followed by the class name. Right? If I want to target this, for example, I would put dot followed by this. Okay. Now, if I want to make this layout vertical like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set some property called display, and I'm going to change it to flex. Okay. And now by default, when you do that, it has messed up my layout. It's in fact made it worse than what it was before. But what I can do to fix that is flex has something called flex direction, and I'll set that to column. Okay. So you can read up about flex. It's got a lot of properties, and it's basically a way to just tell that, okay, inside this container there are 3 elements, and I want these 3 elements to behave in a certain, like I want the layout to to behave in a certain way, and flex has different properties, sub properties to control that. So the moment you say display flex, then these properties come into play. If I say flex direction, you can say row, column, and just to see what are all your options, when you press colon, you get this thing. If I say column reverse, it'll in fact reverse everything. Hollywood Kids came down, play this thing. So this may not make sense right now why we need it for this game, but you can, when you are actually building some own website of yours, it can come in very handy. Okay, so flex direction is one important property. The other thing is called justify content. Okay, so whenever you say flex, display flex, the direction in which you're flexing. So in this case, I'm doing column, right? This justify content property allows you to control the way the items, the children, the flex container children are spaced. So for example, if I say center, all of these are coming in the center of this div. Okay, and this div is actually right now just this big. It starts at the top of Hollywood Quiz and bottom. So it doesn't make any difference. Okay, so for that to make a difference, what I'll say is I'll just make this container's height 100%. Okay, so and I'll also say body's height is 100%. And that also still didn't make a difference. And last thing I'll say is HTML's height is 100%. Okay, so because this is the way this works is, so when I say HTML, which is the outermost document, I say HTML's height 100%. It means that the entire page should be having the height of the visible window width, okay, of whatever is visible. And then when I say body should be 100%, body is a child of this HTML document. So it's basically body is 100% height of HTML. So basically body also gets the same width. And when I say container is height of 100%, again, it's 100% of body. So container now, basically this div container's height is the full height of this. And you can confirm that by, again, right clicking and saying inspect. And in inspect, if you go to elements and you select your container element, you can see the height, 398 pixels. And if you just hover over that, you can see that it's literally spanning the entire height of your screen here, right? You can just fit this to screen. Just change this, so fit to window. Now say this, it's showing you that it's literally spanning the entire height of the screen. All right, so the last thing that I just want to show you is now this layout is still not exactly like this, right? So in this layout, you can see Hollywood quiz is at the top and this play button and all is somewhere below, or maybe you might want it towards the center. So if you just want to control how each and, if you want to adjust the way that it is, way the content is moving around, so we can just play around with some of the other ones. So there are these space around, space between. So let me just try space around. So it's space around, see it has done this, but then my play and play button and this play text have moved away from each other. So to keep those two together, what I'll do is I'll just put them inside another container as well. Okay, and now by doing this, you can see what has happened is this flex container, the outer container, it has only two children. It has only h1 and div. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to space them using the spaces around property. So you can see that in this div container, this purplish region that is there is actually the space around property. It's showing you how the blank space that is there above and below it. Because this play and this button, this icon and this text, I put them together, it's treating these two as one child. Whereas earlier it was treating them as two different children and it was putting space between them as well. Now it is just putting space between this container and this h1, which is why I'm able to get this layer. So you can do really cool things. You can also, I just want one last thing I'll show you before I just pause is you can even put an empty div. Okay. And if you put an empty div, if you notice what happened, I'll just show you again. It actually moves the entire content. Okay. And I think a better way to see this is, let me put space between. So if I put space between, you see this Hollywood quiz right at the top, play and pause right at the bottom. Say I want to bring this up. Okay, a simple trick to do that is just putting something like an empty div, because what that done does is it actually puts a third flex child, and now because space between has to ensure that there is equal space between all the elements. So even though the empty child, if the third child is not doing anything, there is space between. So that's a simple way to just move things up. And in fact, this is how frameworks like Bootstrap and all work, right? So what Bootstrap does is it's a grid system. It just breaks your, your width of your screen into some fixed, maybe 12, I think 12 grids or some, up to maximum 12 grids, with each of them having equal size. So even if you don't use some of the last few grids, like the last 4 or the last 6, your content will still appear in the correct position. And that's exactly how it works. It just breaks it up using something like Flex. Okay. So with that, I'll just pause. Unfortunately, I'll not have time to do animations because I'm already running a little late. So I'll give you all about 5 minutes to just try experimenting with CSS while I answer questions. So please go ahead and ask any questions that you may have at this point. Even if it's related to some previous step, it's okay. Right? Just take your time to catch up right now. So someone has asked me to show the index.html code. Okay. Yeah, until questions come, I'll just continue to continue to just do the background part as well in the meantime. So you can look at it this way. To see how to do backgrounds, what we need to do is there is a background property. Okay? So just feel free to interrupt me because this is the time for you to ask questions, but I'll just go ahead and show how we do backgrounds as well. So you can put an URL here, and again, like what I recommend to you all is when you all are starting out and building websites, don't fetch the image, download it, put it on your browser, and you'll waste a lot of time. What you can do is just go to a website. Let's say I go to Unsplash. I've shared these links, these resources in my document, and say I want a Hollywood image. Okay, so don't go for the browse premium images there. If you see below results on Unsplash, these are all free. Okay, and what you can do is you can just right click and copy image address. Shreya, yes, I will be sharing the recording after this, so you can catch up later. Okay? But do feel free to still ask questions on what doubts you've had, so I can try and clarify it as much as possible right now itself. Okay? But I will be sharing the recording. So if I just copy that image and I put it inside URL, but you need to put it with quotes. Let's do that. Just see what happens here. All of a sudden, my screen gets this background. And what we can do is, if you want to animate this, there's something called, so before I animate this, I'll just set something. I'll just say background size is cover. So this is just a property to say that make sure the background is filling the entire screen. So in the previous case, it was already filling the screen, but in some cases, if your background is smaller than your screen and all, it may not fill it. Another property is called background repeat. I'll just say none. So if your background is smaller than your screen, again, don't repeat it. So this is probably redundant, but I'm just going to put it anyways. So it's not none. I think it is no repeat. I think no repeat. Okay. So I'm just showing you this again. You don't need to do these steps right now, but this is how that animation, that background animation actually is implemented. So animations, I think, are really, really cool. If you learn animations, you can make your websites look really nice. So there's an animation property. Okay. And the way this works is you need to set your the animation name. So let me just write it as background animation. Set background animation. So this can be any name. So see, even I don't perfectly recollect all the properties. So just in the interest of time, I'll just quickly steal the properties from you. So animation, then is the animation time. So I'll say 15 seconds. It can be any number. Then the animation function. So ease in, out. So this means that as you are coming towards the halfway point of this animation time, 10.5 seconds, I want you to ease, like slow down, ease in, and then as you are and even ease in, like even as you're starting the animation, I want you to start slow and then speed up and then slow down and then at not the halfway point, at the end, at the 15 seconds, I again want you to ease out. So again, slow down towards the end, and that's what you see when this thing is moving side to side. It starts slowly and then picks up speed and then moves faster. Okay, so ease in, ease out, and then infinite. Infinite means I want this animation to keep repeating. So that's the animation property. And then what you need to set is something called keyframes. So if I just say keyframes for background animation, let's put this. So this is just defining what should happen at these different phases. So at 0%, what should be, is there some properties you want to this background to have at the start of this animation? So I'll say background position, I want it to be left. Okay, I'll just quickly do this from memory. Right. So what this means is at the start, at 0% of the animation, I want the background position to be left. At halfway through the animation, I want the background to be on the right, and 100% I want the background to be on the left again. So if you come here, now it's not animating, but if I take it, that's because the background is fully filling my screen. But if I just take a smaller screen size, like iPhone XR, this is the code that's running right now, it's actually animating because the screen size is smaller, right? So if I want to animate it even on desktop, what I can just do is I can just try something like this. I'll just scale the entire image. Okay. See, now even on desktop, it's animating. So I change the background size to make the background bigger than my screen size, which is why it's able to move left and right. Earlier, it was not able to move left and right. Right? And now you can see just by just writing a few lines of code, you get an animation. This might be a very basic Like maybe not a very eye-catchy one, but there are some really amazing ones that you can do with very few lines of code. I just wanted to share this with you just so that you all understand. Can we add GIFs as background as well, or does it have to be a still image? I do not know the answer to that question, but I suspect we can surely add it, and why not just quickly try it? GIF image. GIF. This, copy image address. Yeah, you can. All right. So in the interest of time, I need to move ahead to JavaScript. We're running a little late. Again, like the previous step, again, I've skipped creating a new branch and all that. That's not really important. But if you are comfortable doing that, just submit your work in progress changes in a new branch. So I'll just show that here quickly how I do that. So I'll just create Renzel part 2 CSS. Not Renzel. I mean, this account name is Rappo AI. So put it in that. And then I add this and I say completed part 2. And click this and I push it. It has no remote branch. Would you like to publish this part? Okay. And again, select the, don't select the upstream, select origin. If you get that message. So done. So I've completed this or whatever. I've just implemented. You can try out this workshop later. Let's go to JavaScript. So again, to go to JavaScript, switch to origin part 3 JavaScript branch. Right? So now we are in JavaScript. Close all your files, go to the editor. Okay. And over here as well, just switch to JavaScript. Right? So you get the JavaScript documentation, what you need to do. Okay. So again, now we probably just have about 10-15 minutes to cover JavaScript, and that's very less time if you're completely new to programming to learn a new programming language. But I'm going to show you how I go about programming. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do in these 15 minutes. Just before we start, I just want to tell you quickly that if you see the website now, it actually has, if you go to the game page, it has all the styles implemented, right? In very similar to how the final game should look. So basically, like I said earlier, every time you go to the next part, I have already pre-implemented the previous stuff for your convenience, the previous part. So I'm not implemented in JavaScript specifically here, but I've implemented all the CSS. So you don't need to do any of the CSS work. It's already done, right? The other thing also is that just notice that I've put the styles in an external file, which I told you we can do, but we didn't do it earlier, right? So I've used the link tag for that and just put them in external files. So this is a good practice. Like the moment I had to style index.html and game.html, there were a lot of common styles between them. It was getting really messy. So usually you put your styles in an external file. Great. So now JavaScript. How do you, if you see, this is our game right now. This page looks fine, but this page, if I come here, so this is placeholder, right? I just place this text. It's not coming from anywhere. If you see in game.html, I just hard-coded the question here. What name did Tom Hanks give to his volleyball companion? And I've hard-coded the answer options as well. So what we need to do here is we want to implement something where whenever you come to this page, we fetch a new question from somewhere, and I'll show you where. We fetch a new image also from somewhere that is related to the game. And then we update these answer options for that question, right? So that's one thing. And then also you want to react to these clicks, right? So I think this is like anyone who has used software will know what the software has to do, and you can write it down in plain in your language, right? In my case, it's English. So I know how to explain this in English, and you will be able to also explain it. So start from there. Whenever you're programming, and if you're new to programming, even if you're experienced in programming, I would recommend you start from explaining what needs to be done, right? And a good way to explain what needs to be done is something called, I'm calling it pseudocode right now, but when you learn pseudocode in college and all, it may not look like this, but I believe like pseudocode is not tied to any language, right? You can, and the best pseudocode or the easiest to understand is something in your own language that you can speak, right? So I wrote this entire pseudocode in English, right? And if you see this, what it says is when the web page loads, this is what needs to happen. Okay, register, answer button, click handlers. I know this needs to happen just because of experience. I know that we need to have click handlers, button click handlers registered. When you start writing pseudocode, you may not know this. Okay, so like I'll just give you an example. If I were to start writing this pseudocode from scratch, and I've written this in a format called YAML. Okay, so I'll read up about YAML later. But so when the web page loads, I'll just write a few points here. So what we want when the web page loads, I want this question to fetch question and update UI. I know that this needs to be done. So I'm putting it in the form of when some event happens, do these steps, right? So I can have multiple steps here. So I just wrote it as when the web page loads, do this. Another important one that that obviously stands out is when player clicks an answer button, what do you want to do? You want to do a bunch of things. You want to check if answer is correct. And if you want to say something like if correct, there are some other steps that you might want to do. If correct, you may want to, so if you see the game, the final game that actually we play, let's just see what happens. So you actually don't know the answer. Oh, yeah. So if you notice that when I clicked it, I made that button green. So if correct, make button green. So write it in plain English. Don't worry about programming languages. Okay, like people get this is where I think people get a lot of confusion, because if you just start coding something, right, it's not an actual language, especially when you're beginning, for you to express yourself. So just write in a way that you can express yourself. Then you might at the end also want to fetch a new question. Also, if you see what has happened is I've incremented the level on top. So increment level by 1, fetch a new question. So what happens if it's wrong? We make the button. I'm just doing this. You must be familiar with this. I make the button red. I decrease the lives by 1. Okay, so if you see this, say I put the wrong answer, it makes the button red. Then I decrease that heart life by 1. Okay, so I that's what I mean by decrease lives by 1. But I still fetch it. Then I check if lives are, if lives are 0, then say yes. If it is 0, then do this, game over, whatever, basically show game over text. If you see that, that's what actually happens. Let me just put 3 wrong answers. Okay, it shows game over text here. It shows a game over image. Okay, we're not going to do all the things that you see in this game, but I'll just show you the basics. So show game over text and jump to index page. Right, that's what it does maybe after 3 seconds. Okay? And if the lives are not 0, then what you can do is you can fetch a new question, because you've already shown it as red and decrease lives by 1. Also, another thing you may want to do is update the hearts to show, like, one heart is gone. You might have noticed that as well. So if I type the wrong answer, the heart disappears as well. So this is called pseudocode. I just want to quickly start by saying you need to first write your pseudocode. Let me just undo this whole thing, because I've already written it for you. If you switch to this branch, quick way to do this is just revert. So you can revert changes in Git. This is why it's really useful. I mean, one of the nice things we can do. So I've already written all the pseudocode here. Just read that, you'll understand. And I've put it in this form itself. Like, I tried to make it this. I didn't write it. So just know that I didn't write the pseudocode in one shot. I wrote it like how I wrote it before. I started implementing. Then I realized, okay, the pseudocode needs to be written better, because it's not written correctly. And then finally, I put it in this way, which is capturing exactly what we are going to implement and all that. Okay, so it's broken into when an event happens, do these steps. When an event happens, do these steps, right? And if you come to the JavaScript file, what I've done is for each of these, when an event happens, I have a function which starts with this on. Okay, now quick introduction to JavaScript. So I obviously cannot cover JavaScript completely, but just know that JavaScript, or any programming language, the first basic thing you want to do in a programming language, I would say, is understand functions. Okay, this is the concept of a function. Simply because of one reason, a function is a way to encapsulate an idea that you have. Like basically, it's a way to capture an idea that you have. So I have this idea that when the page loads, I want to do these steps, right? So if you can see that this is, I'm saying that when some event happens, do a bunch of steps, which is basically how computers also work. When some event happens, execute this code, right? So this maps very neatly to a function. So if I just have a function that says when page loads or on page load, do these steps. That's what I've done here. So on page load, do these steps. So I've just register answer button click handlers. I've created a function called register answer button click handler below register answer button clicks, and I'm calling the function. Calling the function is basically just do that step, right? Same thing with fetch new question. I've defined the function below, do that step. So for each of the tasks that needs to be done, in the pseudocode, I've created these functions already for you. So that's the first thing you need to understand in JavaScript, okay? That there are functions and it's a neat way to capture the thought flow of what you're trying to do. Like, okay, these are all the things I want to do, and each of them has these steps. So don't even implement the functions. Like, don't implement anything other than functions. First step is just implement the functional flow. Like, these are all the high level functions or the high level events that can happen. And when wrong answer happens, for example, decrement lives, update hearts. Decrement lives, what does it do? It's not implemented. Like, if I come to decrement lives, it's empty. I put a TBD statement there. Update hearts, I put a TBD. But by doing this, if you can do this, what happens is then your task becomes just about filling these. It's like fill in the blanks. You just need to fill these bottommost functions. You can just see a chat message. Okay. I will try to attach the recording link there. So you can see that all of these just need to be filled. And if you actually fill these, it actually works. Like, I actually did this yesterday, and if you just fill these, your entire game will just work. Your goal is just to fill this and nothing else, right? Not the high level function. So that's the first step. Break it down. Put your pseudocode into functions so that the flow is captured. Once you do that, just identify in a function what is the data that you need as well. Okay, that's another thing that you need to think about. So, for example, when this question is loaded, I want to update the question text, update the answer buttons text, etc. So for me to be able to do all these steps, I need to have the question, the answer options, and the answer, like the correct answer. So to get those values here, I have two choices. I can either store them as globals. Globals are global variables, like outside a function, so that any function can access that data, or I can pass them as arguments to that function. All right. So I've chosen to, and always prefer passing things as arguments to functions over globals, right? So I've chosen to pass it as arguments because I believe that we can do this without a need for globals. Like, I know this because I've done this and all that, but when you're building websites, you will have to learn this. Like, okay, which one you will have to think, do I need to do this locally? Do I need to store it globally? Some things I needed to store globally. Like, for example, correct answer. I get the correct answer when the question loads, but I need to check it later in a function when the user clicks a button. And those are two events which are totally disconnected from each other. So somehow I need to store that state independent of these two events, which is why it's a good case for a global, not in this case global, but it's a good case for a global. Similarly, the current level and the current number of lives left. Another nice practice to do is also if you're making any, if you're using any constants like strings and things like that, it's a good practice to put it up. So I've just put all these API URLs at the top. Okay, just with that as the introduction for what we're doing, I'm going to try and let me see. Yeah, we have 5 minutes before I hand it over to you all. So I'll just quickly code few things, okay, just to show you all how this works, and then I'll leave it to you. So if you see the workshop steps, it says call on page load when the web page finishes loading. So how you should do this workshop, this part of the workshop is, you can see there is a TBD saying call on page load when the page loads. And I've given a hint here. Okay, the hint is in, it's basically something that you can Google. So if I just Google for JavaScript run code after page load, and usually the first answer itself will tell you how to do it. So this person is telling, see, these solutions will work. You can put it like this, like this, like this. So because we are dealing in JavaScript, let me take one of these JavaScript answers. I prefer this. So let me say window.onload. So I'm just going to write window.onload. It says if you read up about onload, and I've shared references to how you should learn about this, it says you need to pass a function to it. So that basically tells the browser that when this page has loaded, execute this function. And that function you can see is already there in our pseudocode. Like when page loads, when the web page loads, which means it's already there as a function, as an event function on page load. So I can just set this here. Window.onload, do this. Okay, so you may not see any updates here, but it's actually now calling this function. And what I'll quickly show you is this fetch new question if I can. Okay, so for fetch new, and if you follow that, that's the actually next step that I mentioned. So next step I mentioned is get an API key from Tenor. You can just click there. It's very straightforward to do it. I'm just going to copy my API key from my already published this thing. Sources, JS. I'm just going to copy this. So what you need to do is just replace this API key here with your own API key that you get, because I don't want to publish my API key simply because that's a bad practice. It may actually fail for all of us if we all start using it from different locations and stuff. So everyone should use their own API keys. Tenor is basically, you must be familiar, it's the GIF service. So with Tenor, you will be able to fetch the, and it has something called an API. So this is, I just wanted to show you APIs, which somebody had asked for as well in the beginning. So Tenor has something called a GIF API. And you can read the documentation, how to use it and all that stuff. But get a free API. So I'm not going to do this. Let me just go to the API documentation. GIF API documentation. Yeah. Quick start. So if you read this, it just tells you that you need to fetch from this. You just need to basically do an HTTP GET over here. Okay, so the way you would do something, the way you would fetch data, and typically when you do a fetch data, it's using a GET protocol. So let me just come to fetch new question. Is you use something called fetch in JavaScript. Okay, this is, you say fetch and you pass the URL that you want to fetch. Okay, so I'm just going to, I've already put the URL for you, so you can just take the Tenor API URL and just say, but remember to replace your key first, and then on question load. So let me just implement this fetch clue image. Yeah, so, okay, so there are two things here, sorry. So there is a fetch question. For getting questions, I use something called Open Trivia Database. Okay, you can check it out. I don't know if I've added the link. It's there in the code. It may not be there in the document. I'll add it later. But what you can do is go to the API, and there is an API that tells you how to fetch this thing. And this guy will actually, if you run this, it gives you an API URL. And if you actually, any GET request, right, that doesn't have any other parameters, you can put it in your browser and see the results. Because your browser basically does a HTTP GET request to get results. So if you want to do the same thing, and what it returns here is actually JSON. This is called JSON. So this is a similar to any other document structure. It's a structured way of reading data, right? So it's like a data format, similar to if you're familiar with CSV or other Excel formats and stuff like that. So if you want to fetch this question, what you need to do is, if you follow that, the documentation there, they say, when you're fetching question, fetch question, they say you need to put this, you need to fetch data from this URL in a particular format. So just, I've already pre-populated that for you, and I just wanted to show you that's how you start. You say fetch from a particular URL, and then you have this then clause. Okay, and I'm just going to, in the interest of time, just quickly copy this from the final solution. This is the last thing I'll show you today, in the interest of time. I know it's not a lot of JavaScript, but I hope that it gives you some idea about how you should start doing this. Right? So you just do this, and then you say data. Okay, so this, just explain what this is saying. Okay, this is saying fetch the data from this URL using a regular HTTP GET request, very similar to what a browser does. It's just a way of fetches. Basically, HTTP works by server can serve data over some protocol called the HTTP protocol, and GET is the fundamental way you would get data from that server. So it's just a protocol, but just think about this as, I want to fetch the data of this quiz, like, and if you see this, the data I'm asking for a particular quiz category. So I'm asking for Hollywood questions, I'm asking for difficulty easy, and I want multiple choice type. So all those parameters are actually passed here. These are called query parameters that you're passing here to this endpoint, okay, to this location, which is an API server, which gives you a result. Okay, so when you fetch from here, you get a response. So that response comes here, and this is just a fancy way of writing a function. Okay, so this is just saying function of response. So this, what I have coded before, is called arrow functions. It's a new feature, but just remember that this is just this. The way this fetch works is it's using something called JavaScript promises, but just don't worry about that for now. Just say fetch. Then the first part you can just just copy it verbatim. It doesn't matter. And then when you come finally to this part, right, where you say function of data, right? So basically what's happened, fetch this data. When you get the result, that result comes in response, return the JSON of that response. So convert it into a JSON object. And when I get that JSON data object, I'll just do for now, I'll just do a console.log data and stop. Yeah, I'll just show you this. Let me just confirm that this was correct. Yeah. Okay. Let's see this. Okay. Now this is my website that is in development. I'll just refresh the page, and I'll again just say inspect. And inspect, you'll have a console view. In console view, you'll see now an object has come. Let me open that. And if you keep expanding this, you'll see that I've gotten a question, Casablanca, I've gotten the incorrect answers. You can see the data, right? So this is the output of this. This is how you log. It's a way to display data in JavaScript. So console.log. I just want you all to realize what we've done. Okay, we've basically hooked in the page load. That's what is saying, execute this function when page load happens. And we have partially implemented fetch new question by using the fetch API, the fetch JavaScript function. Okay, that's an inbuilt function in browsers, where you can say fetch with a URL. If it can be any URL, it doesn't have to be an API URL, but we typically use it with API, a URL which returns JSON, right? That just think most of the times you use fetch, you will be using it with an endpoint which returns a JSON object. And JSON object, to convert it into a form that you can work with, you need to do this step. And finally, you get in this function, you get the data in the form of a JSON. So for example, I can JSON the way you would access it or something. You can say data of. So let me just see that object and tell you. So you see there's data of results of 0 of. So you can do something like data of results. Yeah, and now it will, instead of showing you the whole object, it will only show you the results part. Right? And if I take the 0, like this is results is an array. If I take the first element in that array, it will now show, it will log only the first element. And this is how you access data in JSON. Like you basically use these square brackets, and there's a way. So this is like I cannot explain JavaScript in the time that we have. But I just want to tell you that you can use this workshop and this code that I've shared here to learn JavaScript, because what the task that you have is just to implement all of these TDDs, and the hints are given, and also the sequence in which you should implement it. I've also written it here. If you do that, let's show you part 3 JavaScript. So if you do this, just by going in this sequence, you'll actually have your game up and running. And there's also a checkpoint, like every time you implement, like if you implement fetch new question, and then if you update the question text, which maybe I can just show you. Let me just update my question text. Okay, so the way I do that is at the end of fetch new question, so we need to call on question load. You'll see that also in the comments here. So I mentioned that fetch new question data from TriviaDB API and call on question load. So let me just call on question load here with the question. Okay, and the question, if you see inside data, it is stored inside of, it's stored pretty deep. So let me again just log that. Console log data. Let's comment this out. Let's see where is question. So you can see I need to do data of results of 0 of question. I think that may work. So let me just try this. Data of results of 0. I'm doing it a little fast, but basically, you can. It's just I'm just accessing that object, which is the fields of that. And I'm calling on question load, and if you see on question load, earlier I had mentioned as well, I've already extracted out the parameters which I want, which I'm further passing down to others. So And it has 3 parameters: is question, answer options, and answer. So for the answer options, I'm just going to put a blank right now. I'll put 4 blank options. I'll just say 1, 2. This is an array in JavaScript. I'm just going to array of strings. I'm just going to put 4 strings here. And for correct answer, I'm just going to say correct answer is 2. Just in the interest of time, let's see if this worked. It did not update the question. The reason it did not update the question is we need to implement update question text. Okay, so if you implement this function, and in the interest of time, I'll just do it really quick. Okay, there's a get element by ID, and if you see the game.html, if you look at the question text, it has an ID called question text. So I'm just going to say get element by ID question text dot say inner HTML is equal to the question. Okay, so I just completed this basically this step. Just by doing that, can you see this now? Oops. Refresh it again. Yes. Can you see the question has changed? This movie contains the quote, nobody puts baby in a corner. Image and the buttons options have not changed. Okay, but the question has changed, right? And the button options didn't change to 1, 2, 3, 4 because I've not implemented that function which updates the buttons. I've not implemented these functions which updates the image, which I'll leave you to do. But you can see that this question, as I refresh the page, every time when the page loads, the question is updated. So I just want to understand what we have done is we have contacted an external service, gotten the data, and just by passing the data around and passing it finally to this particular element in the HTML, and that's what this says. We're able to update the data and update what you're seeing here on the screen. Okay. So at this point, I'll leave you all maybe 5 minutes to just play around, ask questions. I know it's why do we use API? Can we directly use the links as such? So, okay, Shreya, if you can unmute yourself, you could maybe just clarify what you mean by that, because API is also a link, right? Like to use an API, you need to have a URL. Right? An API is not, doesn't exist by itself. Like what is an API? An API is basically a server that says that if you want to get data from me, you need to contact me at this endpoint, like at this URL. Just the same way as this GitHub is saying, if you want to get this web page, you need to contact me at this URL. So it's the same thing here. What this GitHub web server is returning is an HTML document, and here what this, in this case, what this trivia database API is choosing to return is JSON. And if you really want to see that, you can go inside the network request, just refresh the page, click on this, and if you see the response, you can see here the response. And if you see the headers, response headers, you'll see content type. It's saying application JSON. So I'm returning you JSON. The server is very clear. Whereas if I go to google.com, and if any website, if I go to a website and if I go to the network, assuming this is the app, if you see the response headers, content type, it says text HTML. So I'm returning HTML, right? So this content type header is used by the browser to understand what is it that the server is returning to me, right? But when you're using it inside JavaScript, I think see that's where this JSON and all comes into play. So if the content type is JSON, and when you say response.json, you will be able to convert it into a native JavaScript object and then access all the data like this. Whereas if the content type wasn't JSON, if you got an HTML file, if you ask for google.com here instead, right? Let me just put that. This can be any URL. So if I ask for Google HTTP, yes, if I ask for google.com here, my content type, as you saw, would have been something else, and you would get an error somewhere saying that, say, access to fetch at that. So there are a lot of things that come into play. So here it's saying Google, basically this first error just says that Google doesn't want you to be able to fetch anything from them from JavaScript. So that's CORS, right? So Google CORS just means that only Google's own website should be able to fetch from them. Your website, which is not google.com, not hosted by Google, should not be able to fetch from them. Right? But this open trivia database guy, he has not put that restriction. So, and you can see if you want APIs and all, there are like list of public APIs. I found something very nice on GitHub. These are not, this definitely is not exhaustive, but you can check out this GitHub, which has a large list of public APIs where I think they're all free. So some of them don't even require API keys, like open trivia database, for example. You don't even need an API key. You can just freely call it. Some of them you just need to register, like that tenor thing, which is being used by us. You need to register, and they've told here, like they've mentioned, does it require any authentication? Some of them require API keys. This means you'll need to register with them and just get an API key. But I believe all of these are free. Okay, and then this is telling you whether it supports HTTPS. Most of them should. And this is telling CORS. So if CORS is there, that means that you will have this kind of issue. So in general, you should look for APIs that, if CORS is yes, it means that you won't have this issue. So if CORS is no, it means that the CORS headers have not been put, and then that you may lead into issues like this. Right? But you can find a lot of APIs. Everyone is doing APIs right nowadays. So any tool that you use, I mean, any service that you use, it probably has an API. Razorpay has an API. Want to collect payments on your website? Razorpay has an API. You can integrate it, so on and so forth. There are so many. And it's the same thing. You basically do a fetch call. So right now, when we say fetch with just a URL like this, we are saying fetch using a lot of default parameters. And what are these default parameters? That's what we are not showing here. But basically, if you read the documentation for fetch, right? So fetch MDN docs, you will see all the other extra parameters that you can pass to it. So this fetch. So parameters, and in these parameters, you will see somewhere that you can mention what is the method, right? So by default, it is get. So by default, it is get, HTTP get, and this is what your browser also does. Whenever you go to any website, it is actually doing an HTTP get request of that website. Okay, but you can change it to post. Post is actually used when you're submitting data somewhere, like when you're posting data. So there's post and put. So this is getting into HTTP, but this same thing is extremely powerful. Like if you just understand the parameters you can pass to this function, you can pass the protocol. So you can basically use any API on the planet with just this, just by learning fetch. So any other questions from anybody? Okay, some feedback. Like, did you all find this JavaScript really confusing? It would help me to know. Like, was it? Okay. Would somebody just like to share? Okay, it was an awesome session. Okay, last thing, we're not done. I just want to show you all the last step as part of this workshop. I'm going to show you how you can deploy. Okay, and for that, I have, again, I'm not going to push my code. I'm just, in this case, I'm just going to revert it. So let me just go to, if you follow the guide also, it tells you switch to completed branch. So let me switch to completed branch. This is the full code, okay? The entire web game that's been implemented. So if I refresh this and stuff, you will see that the question is updating, the options are updating. The image is not updating because you need to set the API key, which again, I'll just copy from here. But the way you get your API key is you go to Tenor API and request it. I've given the instructions to do that. Let me just set this here. Okay, and now this page automatically refreshes, and check that out. Daniel Radcliffe became a global star in the film industry due to his performance in which film franchise? And it's showing me a meme related to that. You know what? How I did this is the way this Tenor API works is you pass it any string and it gives you a meme. It gives you GIFs, like it can give you an array of GIFs for that. So what I do is that I pass the correct answer to it. So in this case, Harry Potter is the correct answer. I just pass Harry Potter to Tenor API. It gives me 10 GIFs. I ask for 10 GIFs, and then randomly out of that 10, I show one. Which is why every time you see, if you keep playing this quiz, you'll see this question come often, but the image will usually change. You'll see something else. So that's it. That's how this was implemented. right? So I just want I wanted to show you deployment. Sorry. So far what we're doing is if you shut down Gitpod, this gets destroyed. You don't nobody will be able to see your game. In fact, even if I share this link, my own personal link with anyone, no one will get to see it, right? So the way that works, if you want to do deployments, is so you can switch to the completed branch or whatever. Take any branch. It doesn't matter. You don't need to switch to a branch. Just come to GitHub, the repository. Go to settings. Okay, there are different ways to deploy websites, but this is by far the easiest for static websites, really simple websites like this. So in GitHub, you have in settings for repository, you have something called pages, right? And GitHub pages is nothing but I want to host my website. Basically, it's a way to change, and I want to host my source code as a website, right? GitHub gives you a nice, what do you say? It gives you a feature where you can just host it, right? Host your source code, so you don't need to set up a server somewhere else or do something. So and because it has all your code, all the branches, you can choose what branch you want, right? So I'm just going to, for now, I'll just choose the completed branch, but I can even, like, let's say I'll just take the part 2 CSS branch, save that, and you'll see that your site is ready to be published here. So my site will actually be there on this link, and this link will be a public link. It will always be there, okay? And I'll show you that. I'll show you when it gets published. To see when it gets published, there is an actions here. Just click on that actions, and you'll see the moment you set up GitHub pages, you just select a branch and say save, you'll see an action is being run. Okay, so this is another feature of GitHub actions. So GitHub pages uses this feature, but you can also write your own custom actions. This is an advanced thing. It comes under continuous integration, continuous deployment. It comes under DevOps. You might have heard about this term, DevOps, developer operations. So DevOps is nothing but how can I make developers' life easy? And this, don't you think, is a way to make a developer's life easy? Like if I just write source code and submit it to GitHub and it gets published to the web, it's super easy for me. So that's what's happening here. This some DevOps person, like someone under the field of DevOps, has made my life very easy by setting up a task that runs and publishes my website. So it's running right now, and you can see once it's done, you need to wait for this to become, all three to become green. It usually just takes a minute. So I don't know why it's taking a little longer right now. You can keep digging in to see what exactly is it doing. So here it's saying job is waiting for a host to run into command line. But while that is running, so yeah, that's how you would deploy your page and how you would deploy your website. And just in that pages thing, just make sure you check this enforce HTTPS. It's a good practice. And in fact, if you don't do it, your website will be served like HTTP, and a lot of browsers will not show it properly, or they'll show security warnings and stuff. So just choose that. Even cooler, you have a custom domain, like say I have renzel.com. That's how I've hosted this Hollywood quiz at renzel.com, right? I have a custom domain. So this is actually in my GitHub, in my own GitHub. I have actually set up my custom domain, and you can learn more. We have a guide on that, how to set it. It's actually very easy. Once you buy your own domain name, which you can get for as cheap as $50 if you just want to play around with the domain, or if you want a good long-lasting domain like a .com, it costs around $600 a year. Buy a domain name, even buy one for playing around, and just follow the steps in the guide. It's very simple. First time may take you about half an hour. Next time will take you 2 minutes. It's that easy to set up a custom domain to any website that you build, right? So you can literally keep buying domains and keep publishing your work to the internet, right? So I'm not going to show you that here. Maybe I'll try and show you that in my other account because I don't have so many domains. But let's see if our action is completed. Oh, it's still there. Yeah, I'm not sure why. Usually it runs much faster than this. Okay, I'll just try changing the branch. Maybe it might trigger a new job, and that might be faster. Let's take the completed branch. Save that. Back to actions. You'll see that the previous one, starts a new action. Usually it will stop the previous action. Let's see what's happening here. Yeah, this has started. So this has actually started. So this will complete pretty fast. While this is happening, questions, can you suggest where can I refer to JavaScript for more detailed analysis? Check in the documentation. So if you see the guide, if you come to the JavaScript part of the guide, right, I have actually shared if you just read that in the start, it says, you can learn the basics of JavaScript by reading this MDN tutorial. So I generally prefer reading MDN because you see, whenever you're learning something, you want to learn from the authoritative source, like somebody who is a really strong authority in that space. And MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, is very strong because they are basically Mozilla who have made Firefox today, but I think in the past they have made Netscape. They are there from right from the start of browsers itself. So trusting them and their advice and their opinions on stuff is really good. There are people there who have been there from the start, right? Versus taking someone who's much younger and come and they're teaching something. It's still good, but I would say start from from a really authoritative source, and then use other sources to kind of learn new things on top of that, I would say. So I always refer to MDN as much as possible. So even in the next steps, I mentioned some things that you should, in all the parts I mentioned, things you should master, like to become a master at that, you should be familiar with things like this and all that. So it's not really exhaustive. I've had very less time to put together this guide. I will update it as time progresses, but but start with MDN, start with this tutorial. It will give you a good basics of JavaScript. Start building a lot of projects. And I don't like the term projects. I would say build stuff you like, right? I love games. When I was a kid, I got into programming because of that. I really wanted to build games. The moment you have a purpose, right, it becomes so much easier because your goal then is not to learn JavaScript. It's not to learn CSS or HTML. Those are weak. I would say slightly weaker goals because learning JavaScript is like endless. Like if you try to just learn JavaScript, there's so much to learn. If any topic, if you take, there's so much to learn. Whereas if your goal is to build a game or build something personal to you and all that, even that may be, that may never finish, but that is something that is very deeply personal to you. Like learning JavaScript, everyone is doing it. But building a game that you have your own idea it's only you who's doing that. So it's extremely unique, it's extremely fun, it's very rewarding, and your learning will be very unique. So I would suggest that. Right? So games are a lot of fun. Pick games. I hope with this session you got some sense about how easy it is to actually make games. This is a quiz game. Text-based games are very easy like this. But even if you're trying to do an animated game, like a simple 2D animated game, it's not much more like on top of this. Like you just have to learn a few concepts about how to move objects around, how to react to objects maybe colliding with each other, and how to just react to people clicking on objects, which you've already seen to some extent. It's actually not that hard to even do simple moving based games, like games like 2D games and stuff like that. Right? And I would suggest initially, just I personally would suggest stay away from frameworks. It's my personal opinion. Simply because when you learn a framework, that to the framework itself is written in the base language, right? It's not like that framework is written in some other language or something like that. So when you're learning that, you're just learning someone's opinion of how to use the language. You're not forming your own opinions, and that base and that fundamentals are not being built, right? So same thing with CSS. There is a bootstrap. There is something called Tailwind now that's very popular. In JavaScript, there's React, Vue, Angular, etc. These are all people's opinions. Okay, just try to understand that. It doesn't mean that that's the way it should work. Things should be done, and it's great. Like they do something amazing, no doubt. Like if you were to start with, and you have a particular game in mind or a particular idea in mind, they are a good starting point. But you are not forming your own opinions about how you should actually build that app. And to form your own opinions, I would suggest start with just learning vanilla JavaScript, CSS, HTML, and get your foundations right. So if you do that well, then you will actually be in a position to say that that framework is dumb, right? And that's the kind of position you should try to be in. Right? Even the very popular ones, like why are we using that? Like, or let me write my own framework. Like you can actually go towards something like that. And nothing wrong with using it, but I just suggest as much as possible, if you can achieve something with the fundamentals and the basics, stick to it. Just the last thing I just wanted to share in the completed. If you switch to the completed branch on GitHub, there is a section here called congratulations. So there's just a few things that over there, if you all would like to do, you all can do. That I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, where I will be sharing content about how to become a better coder, and how to also I give a lot of career advice and stuff. Like some of you all must be following my newsletter, so I write a weekly newsletter. You can follow that. on Substack. And I mean, there's a lot of Discord communities around for people to learn coding. So I'm not very familiar with Discord. So if anyone wants to join this Discord server and help me set it up and grow a community and help others learn, please feel free to join that. And if you want to tweet about what you've learned, there's a little link at the bottom where you can just click that and it will just have a tweet template that you can just push up. Right? So I actually didn't say that in the session, but what I want to just share is that it's basically any sort of programming, right? There are two phases to it. So one is the what we want to build, and then the second phase is how we build it, right? So the pseudocode is just what we want to build, and that's the phase that I think anybody can do it. I mean, you can do it without learning anything. Like it's just expressing yourself, writing it down in a document, and trying to put it in a structured form that maps to a programming language in the future. But the what matters a lot more than how. I just want to stress that, right? So today it's JavaScript in this session. Tomorrow you may take another session that's Python. You may want to learn some other language out there, but the same principle follows. Like you first write down what you want to do as pseudocode. Then the how is just a language syntax problem, right? And that takes time. It's like how you learn a new natural language itself. It takes time takes a lot of practice. And because I did the what we are building part, a lot of y'all might start with okay, I'm just directly having to code, and the focus was purely on learning JavaScript syntax in this workshop. But when you're doing your own projects, focus a lot on what am I building, and trying to document that very clearly in a plain language. I'm stressing on that because it's not we give too much importance to the language, but actually the language is not that important. Like if you're able to do the what really well, right? You'll start moving from one language to another very easily, and you'll start taking a natural natural liking towards programming.
Okay.
So never start coding whenever you are working on something. Never start with the language. Just start with plain English or whatever language you're comfortable with. Just express what you want to achieve, and then what I want to achieve, let me achieve it in the form of these functions. Functions are just a way of breaking down multiple steps to just put it together into one step, right? Into one function. So it's just like in that pseudocode, when this happens, do these multiple steps together. So I put those all in a function. Right?
Got it.
So a function is a general concept in programming, not a JavaScript concept. So do your functions first, right? All the functions, basically these are all the things I want my project to do, all the behaviors and all. And then in that, you will see that there are certain functions which call other functions, right, to get the job done. So those are that's what I've kind of covered as my first event functions, all that on when the page loads, do these other
what
functions.
should you do?
Yeah. So those are those also you can do first, right? Write all the higher level functions first. Then the lower level functions, you just write them and put these comments inside saying, I need to implement these. One by one, just, figure out how you implement. Thanks a lot for joining today. It was really nice of you all to spend these 2 hours and ask so many questions. And it's a good learning for me as well. I hope you all learn something new and go on to build amazing stuff. Please do share it. Share whatever you all build with me. I would love to see the impact that something like this might have made on your progress. Thanks everyone, and have a nice day. Have a nice weekend.